Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego.
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
And this is the podcast known as Relatively Sound, the podcast for all the odd souls out there. If you listened to last week's episode, you will know that Tony and I are recording some of these episodes this month live in person, not over Zoom or anything. And we are continuing on with our album for album series. Last week, we listened to Tony's suggestion of the Manic Street Preachers' album Holy Bible. And this week, I gave Tony Mutemath's third studio album called Odd Soul. Tony, you have like pretty much no knowledge of this band until I probably showed you a couple songs of theirs like a year or two ago, right?
That is exactly right. And I believe the song that I think the one from this album that you showed me was Puritania.
Yeah, I think I showed you Quarantine too, but
you might be right.
But yeah, so you really don't know anything about this band, and they are kind of a smaller band, so some of our viewers or listeners might not know them either. They're a rock band from New Orleans. And just a little background on this album, because I didn't really tell you anything prior to this album. My background with them really quick is that I only got into them after I met my girlfriend, Lindsay. They are her favorite band of all time. She's seen them live 10 times. She's seen them in 3 different states. Like I saw them with her for the first time in Seattle on their Vitals tour. And she has a license plate that is actually inspired by this particular album. Even though it's not her favorite of theirs, it is inspired from something from this album. And yeah, they're just her all-time favorite band. Sadly, they are kind of broken up. They're not really a band anymore. But for this album, this was their third. And this was their first album as a 3-piece band because after their second studio album, their guitarist, Greg Hill, left the band. And so when it came to this third album, instead of finding someone else for the band to fill in for the role, they actually just had their bass player, whose name is Roy Mitchell Cardenas. He wrote and played the guitars and bass on this album. Because they're all 3 of them, all 4 of them, because they did eventually add a 4th member after this album. They all play different instruments. Like they all can play percussion. They all can play bass. They all can play guitar. I think they all play keyboards. Like when it comes to musicianship, like they're stellar. And Lindsay wanted me to mention too, their live shows are phenomenal. Like they play like intense sets. They have all the best lighting. They do really cool like stage work. Like they have certain things they do on like every show that's just awesome. And I'll mention some of those later on in this episode. But yeah, they put on like some of the best live show, one of the best live shows I've ever seen. And so, yeah, so for this album, though, particularly, it was just the 3 of them. Paul Meany, their lead singer, Darren King, their drummer, and then Roy, their bassist and guitarist for this album. Although Wikipedia says all of them contributed to guitar, but it was mostly Roy who recorded and writing the guitar and bass parts. So that's just a little background you need to know. What were your initial thoughts like in your first couple listens?
So on my first listen, I thought, how could Rico like this? To the degree of which, he does. I was a little bit thrown off because the first song, just like my first impression, is kind of generic. That's from the title track, the opening title track. I mean, it had good attitude though, but when I heard it, I was like, okay, kind of like effects on the voice, kind of like just some kind of basic rock with good production though, like Black Keys.
What effects do you think were on the vocals?
They're like gritty sounding.
Oh, okay.
Some of the other songs later on have more effects on them, but
Lindsay actually won't mind that you compare them to Black Keys because that's actually another band she really likes.
Now,
I mean, she will take offense to you calling it generic. Although, just for the record, I will say, the opening song, then the title track, Odd Soul, is actually probably my least favorite on the album. I'll just say that. It is my least favorite because I do think it's kind of just a short little song. But I do think it's supposed to kind of set up the album.
Yeah, and I think as an introduction to the band, I didn't feel like it was a bad introduction. And that being said, though, I thought it did have there was interesting things about the chorus in particular. But I guess my point being, yeah, they sounded kind of like the Black Keys, kind of like generic rock. But as the album played out, I can kind of still hear maybe like the roots of that, but they really expand upon it. And it really blew my mind. The musicianship of the band is phenomenal. That was my big takeaway at the end of the album.
And to be fair, I think when we do give these albums a first listen, sometimes Tony and I will choose to listen to it while we're doing something like a little mundane task, whether we're like cleaning the house or walking the dog or something. So I do feel like on any of the albums we've given each other so far, the first listen is kind of like, it's not always going to hit us the same way the third or fourth listen will.
And music is such a mood thing, too. Just how you're feeling that day, what's in your mind. Like, that's why we listen multiple times, is because one listen does not capture it all. Now,
do you think this album had a specific genre they were going for, or like a certain decade of music? Because it was a hard choice to give you a Mutemath album, because I wanted to give you one of their albums because I think, again, their musicianship is off the charts. And Lindsay's favorite album is their second album, Armistice. Their self-titled is a lot of people's favorite and has some of their more bigger songs, the couple that actually did end up on the radio. My favorite actually might have been the last one they put out before they disbanded. But it was hard because this one is, I don't think it's indicative of their sound. They have some songs that are a little, like, their first album had a little bit, maybe kind of that early 2000s rock. And then the second album kind of was like darker songwriting, which I really like. Then the album after this was like electronic and a little bit like more pop. And then the last album they released before they just, they broke up was kind of a combination of all those albums. But I gave you this one because I thought it had a very particular sound. Did you get a very a certain vibe from this album?
Now, I know nothing about this genre I'm about to say, so I apologize if I'm terribly off. But it kind of sounds like they went for like kind of a straightforward like 2010s type of rock. I know this is 2011, but they gave it like a math rock twist.
See, that's funny you say that, because I think of this album as like their 70s rock album. Like, I think there's a lot of songs on here that sounds like, and I can't think of specific bands, but there's a lot of moments on this album where I like hear like Hendrix, or I hear like, those type of guitar tones and sounds. But like you mentioned earlier with even the title track, Odd Soul, with a modern twist. The production always has a bit of that modernness to it. Like you said, like the 2010s.
But modern done very well, granted.
Yeah. So, did you get any of that on this album? Like an older school kind of vibe?
Well, yeah, I did notice that the guitar style seemed to be really kind of that, that old school kind of like blues rock type of thing that you hear a lot, which I think part of why I didn't necessarily think 70s is because I feel like a lot of rock today does kind of go off of that, like think Jack White even.
But see, if you listen to Jack White's newest album, you would not think 70s. If you listen to like White Stripes, yeah.
Yeah, like White Stripes. Yeah.
But his last like 3 albums have been really different. I think I might actually give you one of his down the road for an album for album episode. But yeah, so like I'm curious, what songs impressed you on first listen?
Well, okay. So the first song that impressed me was definitely Britannia. But that being said, now this was one that I believe I've already heard before. Mm-hmm. I always disliked that hook. The chorus hook where he says Britannia.
Yes.
But I will say this. That's because I thought he said Virginia.
Oh, what?
Which, something about the word Virginia in that context, the way he says it, is just...
But you knew what the song title was, right? Like, you think he was going to be singing Virginia in a song, and the hook of a song called Britannia?
Well, first off, it looks like Prytania. It's one of those words you look at, but you don't actually like say it in your head out loud. You're just like, okay, something like with the P. Right? Is that just me?
So that was your only reason for not loving the hook. Do you like the hook more that he's just singing the title of the song?
Well, okay. It's one of those hooks that I thought was kind of annoying, but is really catchy. And it is a strong hook, though. I think maybe part of why I didn't like it is maybe because I thought it was just a little too catchy, a little too forward. But the energy is great, too. But the part that really impressed me about the song is how it was like a song, but there's like the whole drum break in it, which isn't something that you just see in most like pop bands or pop bands that do a little rock too and stuff. So that was cool.
Darren King, their drummer, is, I think, one of the most impressive drummers I've ever heard, live and in a studio. He can sound just like a drum machine at points. Like, that's how clean he plays. But then he can also go crazy and do solos. Like, it's, it has that kind of... Did the song trick you out at the end where you thought it was going to end?
A little bit, yeah.
There's like a second of like silence, a pause, and then go back into the chorus.
Yeah, that was done well. I will say that is one of my favorite parts about the album is when they kind of make it sound almost like a live jam. I liked the proggier elements of the album a lot.
Yeah,
prog, I'm using it vaguely,
Yeah, because there's a lot of songs on this album that... doing a throwback to last week's episode with the Manic Street Preachers, like, there are elements on these songs that, on surface level, if you just give it a quick listen, like, they sound like, yeah, okay, verse, chorus, maybe a bridge. But there's a lot of songs that, like, change up, like, where there's certain songs where, like, you enjoyed the songwriting itself,
Yeah, for sure. Not to jump too much over the album, but... I will say, I think the song that really showcased it the most was Quarantine. Granted, 7 minutes, the longest on the album by at least 2 minutes. And to top it off, too, it transitions really nicely from Equals.
Yes.
I'm not sure if they...
You mean Equals transitions nicely from...
Equals
to
into Quarantine. Yeah. That was a really cool transition. I remembered, like... What made it kind of confusing is because when I was listening to this the first time, I wasn't looking at the titles of each song as it came up. So when I listened to it, I was like, oh, okay. I thought the song had like maybe like a feel change or whatever, but then there was like more tempo and feel changes.
And you're like, wait, if this is still the same song, then this is by far prog, right? Oh.
Right. And then I checked it and I was like halfway through the second song.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow. But I totally loved it. I thought they nailed it. And I think that song is actually one of my favorites. It's kind of hard to compare it to some of the other ones because it is pretty different. But
I'm curious. That is a song where I feel like, and I'm going to show my cards a little bit. It used to be like one of my least favorites on the album. Took a long time for that one to grow on me. I think because it is more in that kind of experimental, songwriting. I do think that it doesn't have as many hooks like some of the songs. Because a lot of the songs have huge hooks.
Very true.
And that one has moments where there's hooks. Especially at the end where he's like, keep the children safe. Or keep the children out of harm. Butchering it. But yeah, like that part near the end, I think is like really catchy. But I feel like the rest of the song sometimes takes a little bit to get into. Oh, I'm sorry. The lyric was, don't ever let your children out of your sight. That was the line. I wanted to get it right.
Yeah, it isn't the most hooky song. But I still think, I think a large part is because their drummer I'm a sucker for bands where the drums are doing their own thing, not necessarily just keeping time.
And that's this band.
Exactly.
But he can, there are songs where he like does keep time, nicely,
Yeah, he definitely can be more reserved. And another thing about Quarantine that was really cool is, so there's a modulation of a riff in that song that is very similar to in Alley's. There's the way they modulate the riff, and it really reminded me of that. And it was cool. I don't know if it was an intentional throwback or just, similar things happening, but it was kind of like, oh, that's like a nod.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about the modulation in Quarantine, but I definitely was going to ask you if you caught the modulation in Alleys, because that's one of my favorite moments in Alleys, because it's so, like, when you hear it for the first time, you're like, oh, like, it sounds like a key change, you know?
We're moving places.
But yeah, but they're still keeping the same, like, you know, tempo and style to the song, you know? But yeah, that's definitely I'm glad you noticed that in both of those songs.
Yeah, and Quarantine, yeah, I really am enjoying Quarantine. Each listen, I still like really enjoy it.
And I will say really quick, not to interrupt you, but this is one of the moments in their live shows on this tour, and then on other tours, like, well, actually when we saw them for the last time on their very last tour, during Quarantine, during the live shows, they would bring out an inflatable mattress that had lights around it, like a string of lights, and the crowd would be, you know, pushing it along the sea of hands, you know, outstretched, and the lead singer would jump on it, Paul would jump on it, and crowd surf on the mattress during the instrumental, because there's a lot of instrumental parts in the song where he's not singing. So, yes.
That's really funny.
That was really cool to see live.
That would be so
I'll
sick.
show you a video after, because they released a video. Funny enough, during Quarantine 2 years ago, they released an unreleased video of the performance where they did that. So,
and, you know, that was something I checked too. I was like, was this song written during Quarantine? And then I found out it was about a decade early.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like Quarantine a lot because it kind of feels like a jigsaw puzzle. Like, there's a lot of little pieces that go together, a lot of moving parts, but it's done seamlessly. And the production's very forward on the album. Like, it's noticeable. The effects here, you know, oh, these drums are super forward right now, and it just really enhances all the songs.
And I like that you mentioned, like, the jigsaw part, because I feel like almost every song on this album, there's, like, okay, when I listen to a Tom Petty song, you're getting Tom Petty playing rhythm guitar, and you're getting Mike Campbell kind of doing probably the same leads in the verse, and then the same leads in the chorus, and then maybe a solo. This song, there's like different riffs happening in each section of the song. There's parts that are being played on bass and guitar that are different than other times during the same song. So I was wondering if you kind of caught that throughout your listens, like as you as a musician who started off on bass and now plays guitar and other instruments, if that's something you notice, especially since most of the guitars and bass parts were written by the same guy.
Yeah, and you know, I think at least a moment for me that made me kind of there was two key moments that made me appreciate the musicianship a lot. One of them is it's in Sunray, how it starts off with like the vibey instrumental, and then these drums come in kind of full force. I heard it and it reminded me of a Primus song, Eyes of the Squirrel from Green Naga Hide, which I have the poster hanging in my room as we speak. And so I heard that, I was like, oh, that's like a real like musician type part that, you know, someone would write if they really know how to play. And then the other cool moment was in, what song was it? It was in Equals during the verse. The bass isn't playing, but when it does, it just comes in with this long slide down on the low E string. And I was like, that's great. That's someone that not only knows how to play bass, but they know their instrument. And that was like, I heard that and I was like, that's my reward for being a musician and listening, is I noticed it.
Yes, that's a very good thing to point out, because when the band started off, like, even though I told you they all play different instruments, you know, like Darren, you know, mostly on their first album, like, he did the drums, Roy did mostly bass and sometimes keys. Greg Hill at the time, the guitarist, did guitarist, little keys, and then Paul Maney sang and he played keys, and one of the instruments he plays is a guitar.
Oh my god!
There's a couple certain songs on their set that he uses it. But yeah, like Roy on bass. I mean, as a musician, he's super underrated. The whole band's underrated, you know, as fuck. But like, especially on bass, like you said, he knows his instrument so well. Like, so he knows and maybe it's because he wrote both the guitar and bass part in Equals. Like, he knew, he's like, I'm going to be doing something kind of busier with the guitar. So in the verse, I want some space. So I'm just going to do that little slide. And there's such a cool part in that song. Like,
Yeah.
Like when I first heard that song, I think I pointed out the same thing to Lindsay. I was like, oh, I love what the bass is doing in the verse.
Yeah, and let's just say real quick, all the bass tones on this album are great. They're thick, they're meaty, they're snarly. They got the growl to it.
Yeah, which I was hoping you were gonna. I kind of was hoping you would think the same with Adam Clayton in last month's YouTube episode.
He has some good parts.
But yeah, I mean, on this album is definitely more showcase. Like in everything, there's not really a song where the bass isn't like in the forefront, at least for part of the song.
There's one exception, but
well, let's get out of the way with, because I had a feeling there was going to be two songs, and Lindsay thought the same. She thought for sure your least favorite was going to be In No Time, and I thought it would be that one and All or Nothing. And I will say, well, I won't say anything. I want to hear, what do you think of those two songs in particular?
So In No Time, I thought it was boring, and I didn't think it went anywhere. And I do understand that there is some dynamic, there is a build and energy, but the build doesn't really go anywhere. And something that we haven't mentioned yet, really, lyrics. To me, just a real quick for this album. To me, this is an album where they could be singing anything, and I would still enjoy it. Just because of the music, new musicianship, and because I really like the lead vocalist's voice. I was kind of like really impressed by some of his parts on some of the tracks. So the fact that there wasn't really redeeming lyrics for me personally on In No Time led it to definitely be the song that I don't really care about too much.
Okay, and then In No Time? That was In No Time. I mean, All or Nothing.
It's probably tied with for one of the top three. Easy.
Oh,
I loved
it. You loved All or Nothing.
Yeah, I didn't like it. I loved it.
Wow. That's a shock. Okay, so I want to hear, obviously I need to hear your thoughts on All or Nothing, but I mean, I like In No Time definitely more than you do, but here's my only issue with the album is that those two songs just don't have, I don't think have the same vibe as the rest. All or Nothing, I think it's a great song. It just sounds like it could have fit on their past two albums better. And In No Time, again, it doesn't fit that kind of 70s rock vibe that I get from the other songs. It does sound like a Mutemath song, but it's a type of ballad that they would end up doing better on their next album, because their next album, Vitals, ended with a ballad that's named Remain. And it's kind of a similar song in like what it's about a little bit, and like musically it's kind of similar, but that one has like just a better build, more natural. It's just a better type of song than In No Time. But I love All or Nothing, but I kind of thought you would think it was a little too slow and didn't fit the album. So why do you love it so much?
Well, okay. So when I first heard the album, I was at work, and I just cleaned for my job. So I'm not distracted, but I'm just doing stuff. But I'm not looking at the titles as they come up. So when I was hearing it, it came in, and I actually didn't know if this album was going to kind of be like kind of a concept album where there's a lot of transitions. Now, I'm not saying it transitioned as intentionally or smoothly as Equals in a Quarantine, but it kind of felt like the song had the introduction with Odd Soul, and then it had a banger and another rock song, and then like the album takes this dip in energy, and it something that it kind of reminded me of is kind of in Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, how On the Run, is just like a synthesizer, like an arpeggiator or whatever, looping, and they're just kind of running the EQ filters on it. That's kind of how it ends too. And now it transitions into Sunray, so it doesn't come out of it like Dark Side of the Moon with a rock song following it. But I just really liked the mood it brought in, and that it shifted the album and kind of added to this jigsaw effect.
But is it a song that you'll enjoy a lot on its own? Or do you really just love the song in the context of the album?
I do like it on its own too, because when I heard that main hook, the "Don't waste your whole life on just half a try,"
yeah,
like that is such a great
and with
falsetto.
the falsetto vocals.
Yeah, like that, like it was like his voice. That's like the sweet spot for his voice in that falsetto. It's just fantastic. And it kind of, I could kind of see it being maybe like a kind of a Coldplay type of thing.
Yeah, song. I mean, it's definitely for sure on the album. It's one of the more, it has some pop elements, unlike some of the other songs on the album. But yeah, I'm sure. I mean,
I love the drumsticks too at the end, where he's like hitting the sticks together.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like the synthesizers at the end, where it's like the do 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 do.
Yeah,
yeah. I think I love that part.
That was a cool texture. They did it simply but well.
And I like the guitar tone, and like just in the intro, you know, like just the kind of little. I don't know if they're like if he's doing like slides, but it's very clean. It's very like kind of like I guess like a Coldplay kind of like you mentioned. Like it could be something that you know. Coldplay would have done. Like
it kind of like one of those Viva La Vida songs structurally, kind of where it's kind of like, oh, this one section, but oh, here's this other moody section.
And I do want to mention, you mentioned his vocals and that you liked his vocals, and I'm really glad. I didn't think you would dislike them because I think he's a great singer.
Britannia wasn't my favorite introduction to his vocals.
Yeah.
Not that I wasn't going to give him a chance, but
yeah, and he does. But the one thing I want to mention is that. This is the album where his vocals started to change because on the first two, especially on the first album, there's a couple songs where he does a very early 2000s kind of scream, kind of like not like a Chester Bennington scream, but like kind of just like a, you know, he had moments where he could kind of do like a little bit of a yell. Not like hardcore rock, metal, like anything like that. But
so are you talking about that yell in Tell Your Heart's Head Up? On the chorus,
imagine that, but imagine more angst in the vocals.
Oh, more.
Yeah, like I guess angst is maybe the better word too. Like his vocals were just a tiny bit more, you know, angsty, if that's the right word I'm looking for. But if that's a word, but and a little less in album 2, Armistice. But then by this album, the falsetto and the higher vocals really started happening. Some people might like that. Some people, I think, probably prefer the vocals on the first 2 albums, but. Everything after this was more of a mix. He did a lot more falsetto, kind of like the opposite of Coldplay, where Chris Martin, the first album, there was a lot of falsetto, and then their second album, Will Rush the Blood to the Head, he had a lot of that lower vocals, like on the song Clocks or the title track of that album. So that is just something to point out that if you like his vocals on this album, you actually might like their next 2 albums, maybe even more vocally than their first 2.
I'll say this. I do like a good yell. Heck, the Manic Street Preachers album from last week is a great example of yelling all over a record, but I love the energy and everything about it. That being said, I feel like I actually really liked how the yelling was in moderation on this record, and I think that's because I feel like the band's a little more unique with his normal singing voice. Well, I guess normal is probably not the right word, but with this type of singing and delivery, that being said, I do really like the yell in Tell Your Heart Heads Up. But I think a whole album of that would have been maybe a little too kind of like generic style.
Yeah, and I would say he does on like their first album, like it wasn't every song, but like
right.
It was definitely more on like the rock songs. So their first album, there are like slower moments too. This album I actually think has the most, maybe some of the most energetic, consistent energetic moments throughout the album. So you did say All or Nothing was in your top 3. I'm assuming your other top 2 Quarantine and Britannia, or is there another one?
There's another one, but may I go back real quick?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So All
or Nothing.
Sorry, I was looking at the wrong song on my notes. I'm sorry. Tell Your Heart's Head Up. That one. We're talking about the vocals. When he came in on hit the first line of singing.
Yeah.
That verse section, totally heard Les Claypool singing it. I could see Les Claypool delivering it like that.
Okay, well, I won't tell Lindsay that because if she goes then and listens to Les Claypool, she's going to think that you were insulting Paul.
Hey, wait, it depends which Les Claypool you listen to because he has some great vocal performances.
But you just mean like the style of vocals? Like he comes in when he's like, when I was young and unafraid. It was almost like a talking kind of like jazzy thing, which I think is a really cool take on this song.
Les Claypool is always doing characters. He's always playing different characters, different accents of Southern people. Like, it's always characters. So, I mean, granted, I'm sure he, what's this guy's name? Paul?
Yes.
Paul's going to play some characters too. And I just thought it was cool how he did it. It felt fun and fresh. But you were asking about my other favorites. So, yeah, All or Nothing, Quarantine, and Equals. And I'll tell you exactly why Equals is the one. That probably is my favorite. Because it's in between.
Oh, so this. What do you mean?
Equals is in between Quarantine and All or Nothing.
You mean in terms of the sonic sound of it, right?
Yes. The chorus is that melodic, really kind of unique sound of All or Nothing, but it rocks still like Quarantine, and it's in a normal song format too. It's digestible.
Yes,
You can listen to it whenever.
That's like you said it perfectly, because that's exactly how I would have described it on my first list. When I first listened to it, I think I had the exact same reaction you had. I do want to point out really quick that this song and their live set, when they played this, I don't think they really played it too much outside of this tour.
And this is Equals, right?
Equals, yeah. When they played this on the tour for Odd Soul, during the intro, like, how it's kind of like the syncopated kind of, intro?
With like the atmospheric guitar thing.
Yeah. How the song kind of has like da-na-na-na-na-na-da-dun-dun. There was like a moment, if you watch the live videos, where they would shoot confetti like out of like cannons, and yeah, it was just cool. And then Lindsay has a personal attachment to the song in the sense that when she saw them, I think it was when she saw them in Pennsylvania, it was during the song where he like ran through through the crowd, and there was a part, and he was still singing like the song, and she can tell you exactly the word he sang, where he held her hand for part of it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it was a cool moment. But no, yeah, I guess I should have. I thought either Equals would have been a song you really loved, or one that you kind of just like not think too much about.
Now, why would you think I would not think too much about it?
Because I thought maybe you would like the verses, but I kind of didn't know if you would like the same thing with All or Nothing. I didn't know if you'd like those songs because of the more chill melodic parts.
Well, what I think I really like about this band is that they're able to pull off those fast rhythmic sections. And usually it's done through the drums, just because, it makes sense. And with a drummer this good, why not? But when they are able to mix that with, the atmospheric guitars and the keyboards, and let me just say that real quick. I love the subtlety of the keyboards on this album. Like, there's definitely obviously loud keyboard parts, but they're not taking over the song, which I really appreciated.
Really quick though, there's definitely keyboards, because in all their albums, there's synths, there's piano, there's keys. They like to use Rhodes a lot, which is like one of my favorite sounds when it comes to like keyboards.
Classic.
But did you notice this album has a lot of what do you think?
Organ?
There's a lot of organ. In fact, like in the live videos you can watch of the concert on YouTube, you see him playing like an organ during some of the songs. I think some of it you can hear on the song Equals. I think the song that showcases it the most is
One More.
That one, and then Tell Your Heart Heads Up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad you liked, the contrast between like the kind of rock parts in Equals and the melodic kind of uplifting chorus. And that one is one I really like lyrically too. Like someone singing about being like equals with one another, like I don't know. I that's like a really cool kind of statement to a song that you don't hear a lot of people singing about. Like usually if it's a love song, it's like telling this other person, you're the best thing ever. Or you're like, you're the everything. But no, it's like they're saying like we're equals,
I will say that is one where I did think the lyrics were a little bit above the rest of them. Now, I haven't deep dived into any of the lyrics for the song, so I'm not trying to make an overall statement of the song. But I did notice that, lyrically it had a little more contrast compared to the rest. I will say, though, so we're talking about kind of the elements again of the band. I think what I didn't love at first was I didn't love a lot of the guitar riffs, and not because they're bad, and the tones are fantastic. But they're a little bit of those kind of basic pentatonic licks, riffs, and stuff that you hear that are kind of tired out. And I wanted to kind of like, give the album kind of a point down, because of that. But they made it work so good, and the tones were all there to match. And even though my favorite parts of the band still is probably more like the rhythm section, just because they're nuts, like, they made it work.
Yeah, I think I would be very interested, and I might down the road, that Mutemath is definitely a band I'll probably give you, like their second album, Lindsay's favorite and one of my favorites. I would love to see what you think of either their first guitarist, Greg, or the guitarist they went after this album when they got a fourth member. His name was Todd Gummerman. They both play very, very different styles, and then Roy being the third, you know. And I'm curious how you think of the guitar parts on the first two albums, because I wonder if having almost like this pressure of having to write the bass and guitar parts and record them both was, you know, hard for Roy, and I wonder if maybe that's why for you some of the guitar parts seem like you know, and maybe that's why I thought it sounded 70s, because like not prog 70s, but like 70s where you do have like, you know, more general like pentatonic scales and like soloing and stuff. Like there's never elements on this album where like they were doing anything like left field in the sense. It was more about the songwriting and the song formatting than I feel like in production than I feel like it was writing actual riffs.
Now Roy, you said, was the bassist, right? The guy who did the guitars too? Is that his name?
Yeah.
So I imagine Roy had a different approach, you know, it's a different mindset doing that. But you made a good point about kind of going back to the 70s type of vibe that you got. And thinking about it now, that kind of makes sense, because a lot of those 70s rock bands were like one guy on the guitar and then one guy on bass, you know, drummer and singer. So I can kind of hear that, like, oh, you know, they're doing a rock thing, so one guy is going to play those type of 70s. You know, I'm now that I'm kind of picturing this with those, you know, that new thought, I do see that comparison that you're making. Now, even though we're talking about kind of the basicness of the guitars in ways, there was two particular guitar moments that I really enjoyed, and they were the highlights of the guitar for me. And they're both intros to songs. One was Britannia, like the introduction, the way the guitars come in. But
I love the introduction to Britannia. I just love that whole intro.
And the other one, sorry, I'm trying to find it in my notes. I want to make sure I get it right.
Was it
Allies?
Allies?
Sorry, Allies. Yeah, I guess so. No, Walking Paranoia. Sorry, that took me forever.
That's it. Both those songs, Walking Paranoia and Britannia, gives me heavy 70s vibes.
Yeah, those start off with a sick riff.
Yeah. Now, interesting enough, Britannia is one of my favorites on the album. I might even go as far as to say it's my favorite. Just because I think it's super catchy. Walking Paranoia had to grow on me, and it's still not one of my favorites. So I was kind of curious if how you would have thought of this song, because it's I don't know, like I think the groove is great. It's got a great groove, and it's kind of more groovy, but it doesn't rock as hard as some of the others, like Allies or Calvaries, you know.
Yeah, I like looking at my notes. All my notes are basically like, oh, love this tone. It's kind of funky. It's got a good verse groove. Like, it's one that I feel like that's one of those songs where there's nothing really bad about it, and that you could praise it, but compared to the other songs, there's not as many standout parts. Now, the standout part for me was being that introduction. But at the same time, though, a song like Calvaries has a great intro as well. Like, there's plenty of great intros on the album.
Na, 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 na. Like, that part's great, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a sucker for 3/4 on the, you know, the drums.
But then it has a change up, right? In the middle of the song? Does it go to straight 4/4 time?
I believe so, yeah. Was that the one that we played yesterday?
Yes, yeah, I played that one out loud yesterday when we were playing games.
Yeah, which that was something I didn't even necessarily notice because they do it so smooth, you know?
Yeah, it's smooth. That's the thing about this song, right? I mean, maybe the only song that isn't as smooth as Quarantine, but I feel like it's supposed to be a little messy and a little all over the place.
Yeah, it doesn't give you whiplash, though.
Which is why I didn't maybe love it on my first few listens. But yeah, Calvaries is one of that one's become one of my favorites over the years because that one doesn't have a lot of lyrics, and I feel like it's kind of like Quarantine because it's really about just like the overall vibe, like, you know, the bass, like the rhythm section, like you said, it's grooving.
Yeah, and once again, this album isn't about lyrics for me, and for the vocals, it's about the hooks. So like that, you know, that little intro bit you just sang, like that's the hook, like that's the part I like.
Or like at the end of Walking Paranoia, there's like the I butchered the notes, but like, you know, the little kind of, and there's moments on this album where they do kind of those little things, which I know you probably are like,
okay, yeah, I can hear it now actually.
Yeah. Where in the background, one of them, he's singing like Walking Paranoia. Yeah. So, there's little moments like that on this album that I really like.
There was definitely, So for me, there was I would kind of group like Allies, Calvaries, well, more like Allies and Walking Paranoia and like Blood Pressure, Tell Your Heart's Head Up. Like those are kind of like the more straightforward kind of rock ones. Now, granted, they're all good songs. But so those are kind of, some of them had a little more standout features, such as Calvaries being in 3/4 and everything. But there was one that I thought was a little bit more, we're going to throw back to our Hot Thoughts episode. One of them that kind of felt like the Shotgun of the album. Now, I like it more than Shotgun, though. So you could guess it now, Rico. I'm sure you already know which one I'm talking about at this point. Process of Elimination.
The only song we haven't released, is it One More?
Yes.
That's shocking because One More is one of my favorites, and it's one of Lindsay's favorites. Why didn't you like One More?
No, I didn't say that. But it's the Shotgun of the album because it feels like a song that's supposed to be.
You would like more. Is that what you're saying?
No, I definitely no. I like this song still. I like the song. Don't get me wrong. I like the song on the album, but it kind of feels like what Shotgun kind of was. It was kind of like one of the kind of rock songs in the second half of the album that's easy to get into. Like to me, I think of it as like kind of a song you would hear on Rock Band, the game. And the organ is great in there. It's rocking. The bass goes ham. Like the bass is going crazy in it, really.
That second part of the song, like the bass is just fantastic. Like I can hear it's one of those songs where like I can hear the bass like, but even like okay, so like there's like I think the first verse, the second verse, it's just bass, drums, and vocals. Like there's no guitar.
Yeah.
So I love the dynamics. But then like after like the part where it starts to slow down and some of the instruments drop out, the guitar comes in like that. Like I love that. Like it's just so like I don't know.
It's not my least favorite though. It's not my least favorite. I don't mean it like that. I do like it. But it is one that I kind of felt like was like when I first heard it, I almost felt like, could this be filler? But then when I heard the rest of it, I was like, okay, no, this is a great song.
And I don't know, like
rockin'.
I like he's like kind of like the chorus I really like it's less hooky than some of the other choruses, but it's like he's just like give me one more reason. Like he's kind of pleading like give me one more, and I like the lyrics in this one too. Like I don't know, it's just like it's kind of like a character song. I feel like tell your heart heads up, you know, like you were saying where he's singing through a character.
Yeah.
Because Tell Your Heart Heads Up, I wanted to mention that song. I love the lyrics where he's like, I need to tell you that. Like he sings that at least the first verse. Like at the end of every line, he's like, well, I have to tell you that. Like I just love it. It's like again, it's kind of like he's playing it up. He's having fun, you know.
He's really great at making these little memorable, like I guess I was saying like hooks a lot, but even that isn't really a hook, but it's such a memorable bit. And I mean, I would say I like One more than like Walking Paranoia. I think, you know.
And because your least favorite, you would say, is In No Time. So like you like that more than In No Time.
In No Time by far is my least favorite.
Yeah.
And then honestly, it's probably Odd Soul. So I don't think they started. I mean, I think I see why they started with Odd Soul.
They kind of ease into the album a little bit, you know, because Odd Soul, I think that's actually one of the better one lyrically because he's like singing like I'm an odd soul. And it's kind of about like, I think lyrically it's about like finding the people you connect with who consider themselves quote unquote odd souls, you know?
Yeah, I kind of got that vibe from it.
And I kind of think it's a more of a vibey song than like, yeah, it's not one of the songs I'm most impressed with like musically. Even though it does have that one cool part in the middle where it sounds like it's going to change that chord progression. Like, I'll have to play it for you later. Like, there's like the one part where like it does change the progression. It's very subtle and it's very short. But it doesn't add a little nice change up to the song, even though it's not like over your, you know. But I'm curious of what you thought of Blood Pressure, because Blood Pressure was like the one single from the album. They had by the way, all their music videos for most of their songs are really cool. Blood Pressure was filmed in a very cool creative process. And it was like I think the biggest single from this album. And I wonder what you thought about that, because that one I think is the most like radio kind of friendly, but in a good way. Like it's really, really catchy. It's one of the most catchy on the album.
Right. It is really catchy. Like okay. It's kind of it's a basic song, but it sounds like a song, if that makes sense. Like it sounds right when you hear the hook and everything.
Yeah.
And honestly, I could see it kind of even kind of being maybe a little bit of like a really simplified Queens of the Stone Age thing. You know how Josh Homme does that
Really?
kind of, he's always messing with production, but sometimes he does those kind of like more straightforward like riffs. and
I guess I
songs.
could see. I guess, especially with their newest album, Villains. Especially the chorus
Right.
where it's like the da na 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 na. Like,
Yeah. Like
okay, now that
new
you
quotes
say,
are-
yeah, I don't. Not everyone will agree with us. Who know? Like, Lindsay knows and likes Queens of the Stone Age. I don't know if she would agree, but yeah, like I can kind of hear that. You know, it wouldn't be something you'd hear like on Songs for the Deaf or anything, but like on Villains or maybe Era. You know, like they have those songs, or I can hear that.
Yeah. So that was something I kind of noticed. But you know, honestly though, I thought because it was so catchy that actually might be one of the stronger songs on the album for me, but it actually kind of worked its way near the bottom.
It's I kind of didn't think it was going to be in your top just because I thought it's a little bit more simplified version of the formula they were doing for this album.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, although I do like the dynamics are great. There's the one part, the second time it goes into the chorus, that riff where it's like like it. That sounded terrible, by the way. But like, all the instruments cuts out, but just the riff, and there's a quick pause, and then it goes into the chorus. Da na 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 na.
Yeah.
That part I love. Like
That
you know.
that is a good part.
Although I did, and by the way, when they did their last tour, they did a really cool version of Blood Pressure where it was kind of like it was a little darker sounding, and it kind of had like a pulsating like a bass line. Totally different version of. I'll play it for you later. Like it's really.
Is
cool.
it better?
I think you'll like it better. I think I still like the original better, but you would like it better. But yeah, I'm not super surprised that like it didn't end up in your top. But I wonder if did you catch that song? I think lyrically it is easier to like hear the lyrics. Did you happen to hear the very first line of the song?
I mean, if I did, I couldn't tell you. But I will say something though.
Yeah.
What kind of bothered me about this song is that you hear him say pressure so much, and then down the album, there's another song where he says pressure really, where it's very audible, and not that it bothered me, but I don't know. I thought it was something I noticed.
Song. Maybe Walking Paranoia.
I think it might be Allies.
It could be. But no, the first line in Blood Pressure, he sings, "Why can't you be more like your older brother?" So when I gave you this album and I was listening to it like, the other day in the car, I was like, oh, I wonder if Tony's going to take offense to that because I'm calling him out by giving him this song on this album.
Actually, I do think I remember hearing that line. I didn't know it was the opening line.
Yeah. So, and then you, just to briefly touch on it, you did like the instrumental because they kind of for a while were putting an instrumental in all their albums. They have one of Lindsay's favorite songs is their song called Reset, which is on their first album. You would love that instrumental. That one, it's like a song where there's a lot of moving parts, and it's not just. I feel like on this album, Sunray is kind of like an interlude. Really cool one. I think it sounds like it could be in a spy film, but I don't know. Just like that very beginning kind of vibophoning kind of sound. Like it sounds like the beginning of "Wake Up" kind of by Mad Season.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for vibraphones.
Yeah.
So I instantly
Or xylophone.
enjoyed
I mean,
it.
it's probably a xylophone because I think
No.
vibraphone. Well,
Xylophone's all tinky.
What was the episode we were doing where we talked about vibraphone? It was on an.
There's like a different STP album with vibraphone. I don't think it was.
I
this
think it was
one.
like there's a song I think Automatic for the People where they use a vibraphone, or maybe the Elliot. It was an album you gave me, I think, but
Really?
anyway, I can't think of it now. But anyway, they do instrumentals. You know, they have a good amount of instrumentals. There's an instrumental in their album, Vitals as well. They also just have a couple bonus unreleased songs or bonus songs from other albums or the instrumentals. So
and kind of funnily enough, that is also like another like I would say like a 70s old school type of thing. So you have an album, but you know every album has at least like one instrumental, which I feel like isn't necessarily as much of a thing now necessarily.
yeah, I like a good instrumental. You know,
Me too. I'm all for it. I think as long as you you actually write the instrumental and not just like, oh, here's a little piano lick I made or something like.
And I'm really okay with it for this band because the rhythm section, I mean, Roy and Darren are like some of the most underrated musicians. Like, even though Mutemath, I don't put them like, in my top 5 like Lindsay would, or top 3. They would rank higher on my list than you probably would realize, but like they are more talented than some of the like even some of my favorite bands, like they're fantastic. Like they, Darren live, like again, I'll have to show you some live shows because like they would come on stage and the first thing he would do is he would walk to his drum kit and he would grab a pair of headphones like the ones we're using right now. And he had this special tape, black tape. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like tape that you can like tape to like hair in your skin. And he would literally tape it around the headphones and onto his chin, under his chin, all the way around in a circle because he goes so hard that the headphones would come off if he didn't use like the black tape to stick it to his head. So, but yeah, like they just went crazy live there. They have songs during their live shows where, it wasn't the kick drum. I think it was like a tom. He would take from his drum kit, and he would play it during one of the instrumental parts on one of their songs from their first album. And he'd be playing it like right in front of he'd bring it right in front to the stage and he'd play it. And then the other members of the band are still playing their own instruments, playing percussion parts too. He'd jump on top of the tom kit and then he'd do a back like flip into the crowd.
These guys are insane.
And then Paul too, lead singer, he would always like do this like, his keyboard, he would, and Lindsay has a great picture of him doing it during one of their songs, during a part, he would jump and press his whole body onto the keyboards, like with his whole forearm on the keyboard and flip his whole body up in the air, but then come back down and land on his feet. Like he wouldn't do a full flip. He would just do like a half flip in the air. Like it's crazy.
That makes Ben Folds look like he's just like massaging his piano at that point.
Yeah, no, it's very fun, but yeah, like I would watch their live shows for sure. And after this, I'm sure for sure I'm going to show you some of their live shows, clips from their songs and their music videos, because the music videos are great too. But so it sounded like you overall really enjoyed the album, right? Like, how would you compare it to some of the albums I've given you? Like comparing it to last month's U2 album, comparing it to the Phoebe Bridgers album, the Spoon album. Like where does this rank for you? Like because I told you on last week's episode that the Manic Street Preachers is an album that I probably won't return to as much, just more like particular songs. But what about this album for you?
Oh, I would totally go back to this album. And I would say it's kind of tricky because I would say that I will say I think Fully Completely, the first one you gave me, is still probably my favorite of them. There was just something about that batch of songs that was, like, granted, that's a more straightforward album. The songs, none of them are crazy long. They're all songs you can listen standalone. They don't transition to each other. But this album, I think, is, it has a musicianship that isn't, seen within the other albums. And it has unique properties. So it's kind of hard to compare it directly. But easily, second best album you given me. And I'm really tempted to hear what else the band does.
I know. I want to tell you to go because, like I said, all their albums have a kind of different sound. Like, I will say their first two have the most similar sound, even though the second album I think is a little darker in tone. They still have similar vibes, but like this one, especially since the guitarist left, had a totally different feel. And then the next album, they bring in the fourth member, Todd, on guitar, and then it's more of like electronic pop album. But then like one of my favorites is their fifth album they put out, their last one, called Play Dead, where it's got a song on it that sounds like it could have been from Odd Soul, that 70s rock sound, but then it has sounds from their other three albums as well. So, I'm gonna say probably hold off because I can definitely see me giving you one of these, not right away because I still want to give you a ton of more artists before we start repeating bands and artists, but yeah, you're definitely going to hear them again. But I mean, if you loved it so much, I mean, go ahead and listen on your own. Like, if you can just listen to them no matter what, they're so underrated. I don't care if it's on the podcast or off the podcast. Like, definitely give them a listen if.
Yeah, no, it definitely impressed me, and like Because when we do these, I think about, okay, well, do I want to wait till you recommend me one and whatnot, or should I just kind of dive in? With Spoon, I think that was like one where I thought about it because I was like, well, I really want to see what they have to offer. But with but I was able to hold off. But with Mutemath, there's that musician side of me that's like, oh, what other sick jams do they have?
And
what riff do I want to learn? Like,
and see, I thought that's how you would have been with Radiohead, so I'm a little surprised.
Well, okay. That being said, I still do want to learn the Body Snatchers riff.
Oh yeah.
But but then it makes me kind of sad that I know this is awful to say, but it makes me kind of sad that Tom York plays a lot of the riffs because I want to be more like the other guy playing the riffs.
But that's only I feel like
I know
for
it
In
sounds stupid
Rainbows.
to say.
There's other songs on their other albums where Johnny is playing like a main riff.
Oh, so Tom York is the In Rainbows riff master.
I feel like that's maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I definitely am not the fanboy of Radiohead that most like a lot of people who are fans of the band are, but yeah, I feel like there's other songs where, and there are some Radiohead songs where he doesn't even play guitar. He's not necessarily playing guitar in every song, but I will say like a majority he does, but you know.
Yeah, and Radiohead's another band too where I kind of like am still kind of on the edge of maybe I should check out this or whatnot. I think if anything, I'll go back and listen to OK Computer and
yeah. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the album. Lindsay will be pleased. I mean, she's still going to be mad you said anything negative about it because they are her, like, by far her favorite band.
Wait, what's her favorite? Did you say?
On the album?
Favorite and least favorite, real quick, just to end it.
Oh, that is hard.
If you get it wrong, she's going to hate you.
No, I'm just going to text her. We're doing this live on air right now. I'm going to ask her what's her favorite and least favorite.
Yeah, because I don't know Lindsay's taste too much. I mean, I know
guess,
some bands
I know
she
her
likes,
least favorite's probably actually In No Time. That's her least favorite.
It's a snoozer.
Her favorite? I think she really likes Tell Your Heart Heads Up. And I know she really likes one more and she really likes Equals. But I think Equals she really likes it because of that moment she had during the concert.
Right.
She's texting me back. Let's see here. Maybe this might be cut out in post. I don't know. I mean, she's texting me back, so we'll see here. She says I can't pick.
That's helpful.
No,
I
understand.
Did you tell her it's for the show, for the podcast?
Well, I told her quick, so I think she has to. I told her we were still recording. I told her. She says I can't pick. It changes. She says I think Equals might be my favorite.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah.
Tell her me too.
And then she said In No Time I Leave. So I had her right pretty much.
And here's what I'll say. Like not to all of a sudden just slap but this about the album sucks. In No Time is way worse than all the other songs. Like to the point where like it's not just like, oh, it's a song that I can do without. Oh, it's a song I can hit skip for.
Yeah.
Why did they put it on? There was no need for it.
I think over time, if you listen to it enough, I think you can learn to love it. Because I did too. Because I think on first listen, I was a little like underwhelmed. But it's a sweet ballad. And if like you read the lyrics, even though they're a little bit more corny compared to some of the other songs, like if you can relate to the lyrics, I think you can find the song to be more tolerable. But I told Lindsay those were your favorite and least favorites too. And she said, fuck yes, Tony, we can still be friends.
Yes.
So despite whatever else, a little negative, nitpicky things you had to say about the album.
Right. We can still be equals.
Yeah, there you go. And those are good picks. Like I said, I think my least favorite is... Honestly, I think my least favorite is Odd Soul. And I think my favorite is Britannia. But they've been... Like I said,
interesting. So your least favorite is what starts the album, and then your favorite is what follows it.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe that's just because, like... It's one of those albums where it's like, yeah, like I first put it on, and I'm like... Okay, yeah, I'm kind of glad this is the song we get out of the way with, and then we get to the real bangers, you know? But yeah, it's fantastic, all of it. So, but yeah, I know some of our viewers. There'll be some who are probably Mutemath fans who will have a lot to say. But if you're listening to this and you've never heard this album or this band, check them out. Definitely check out this album. Check out their first two. Vitals is probably the only one you don't want to check out first because I do think it's their weakest, but only because it's the most different. But definitely check them out. Super underrated band. Wish, hopefully one day they will all reunite and play again. But We hope you enjoyed the show. Next week's episode is going to be a treat. That's all I'm going to say. It's going to be a special episode. It's going to be a first-time thing for the podcast, so stay tuned for that. And until then, we hope you take care, and you'll be hearing from us soon. Bye-bye.